The Nevada desert stretches endlessly in every direction, a vast expanse of sand, rock, and secrets buried beneath the scorching sun. It's a place where reality seems to bend, where the horizon shimmers with heat mirages, and where four friends found themselves drawn to explore the unexplained. Meet Jake, the group's natural leader, always pushing forward with an insatiable curiosity about the unknown. Then there's Sarah, the skeptic, who questions everything and demands logical explanations. Marcus brings his keen eye for detail, noticing things others miss, while Devin keeps spirits high with his humor, even when things get weird. Hey everyone, if you enjoy mysterious content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. It really helps us bring you more incredible stories. Alright, let's continue. It started on a Friday afternoon in late October. The four friends had been planning this trip for months, ever since Jake stumbled upon online forums discussing strange phenomena in the remote stretches of the Nevada desert. Lights that didn't behave like aircraft. Sounds that had no apparent source. Rock formations that seemed to move overnight. Jake was convinced they needed to see it for themselves. Are we seriously doing this? Sarah asked as they loaded camping gear into Jake's weathered SUV. Driving hours into the middle of nowhere based on internet stories? That's exactly why we're doing it, Jake replied, his eyes bright with excitement. These aren't just random posts. Multiple people, over years, reporting similar experiences in the same general area. Something's going on out there. Marcus carefully packed his camera equipment, ensuring each lens was secure. Whether we find anything or not, the landscape alone will be worth documenting. The desert has a way of revealing things you don't expect. Devin tossed his backpack into the vehicle and grinned. Plus, if we disappear mysteriously, at least we'll become internet legends ourselves. That's got to be worth something, right? The drive took them far from the main highways, down increasingly isolated roads until the pavement gave way to dirt and gravel. Cell service disappeared within the first hour. The desert landscape transformed around them, from scattered vegetation to bare rock formations jutting from the earth like ancient monuments. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the interior of the SUV into an oven despite the air conditioning running at full blast. According to the coordinates I compiled, Marcus said, studying his GPS device, most of the reported phenomena cluster around an area about 30 miles northeast of where we are now. There's an old dry lake bed, some canyon systems, and a series of rock formations that locals apparently avoid. Locals avoid it? That's not ominous at all, Sarah muttered, staring out the window at the desolate landscape. Come on, Sarah, Jake said. You don't actually believe in curses or haunted deserts, do you? No, but I believe in getting lost and dying of dehydration in a place where no one will find our bodies for months. Devin laughed from the back seat. Always looking on the bright side, aren't you? They reached their planned camping spot as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and deep red. The location Jake had chosen sat in a shallow basin surrounded by weathered rock formations, offering some protection from the wind while providing clear views in all directions. As they set up their tents, the temperature began to drop rapidly, the desert's notorious temperature swings becoming immediately apparent. First night, we should probably just get settled, maybe do some preliminary exploration nearby, Marcus suggested, assembling his camera on a tripod. Save the deeper expedition for tomorrow when we have full daylight. Jake nodded, though his restlessness was obvious. Fair enough. But I want to at least check out those formations to the east before it gets completely dark. There's supposed to be some unusual markings on them. The four friends walked together across the sandy terrain, their boots crunching on the mixture of sand and small rocks. The formations Marcus had mentioned rose about 20 feet high, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and time. But as they approached, even Sarah had to admit something seemed unusual about them. These patterns, Marcus said, running his hand over the rock surface. They're too regular to be natural erosion. Deep grooves spiraled across the rock face in deliberate patterns, intersecting at odd angles. They didn't look like petroglyphs or any recognizable human marking. Devon pulled out his phone to take photos, even though he knew they'd have to wait until they had service again to share them. Could be ancient, Jake offered. Or maybe just some art project someone did years ago. Out here? Sarah asked. Who would come all this way to carve random patterns into rocks? As darkness fell completely, the desert transformed. The temperature plummeted, and the stars emerged with a brilliance none of them had experienced before. Without light pollution, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of diamonds. They built a small fire and huddled around it, sharing trail mix and discussing their plans for the next day. That's when they heard it. A low humming sound, barely perceptible at first, seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't natural either. It pulsed rhythmically, rising and falling in waves that made the air feel thick. "Please tell me you all hear that," Devon said, his usual humor faltering. They all nodded, standing and looking around in confusion. The sound continued for nearly 5 minutes before fading away completely, leaving them in the profound silence of the desert night. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered. Marcus had grabbed his audio recorder and was checking the playback. "I got it recorded. Whatever it was real, not just in our heads." Jake's excitement was palpable despite the unsettling nature of the experience. "This is exactly what people reported. Unexplained sounds with no apparent source." "There has to be a source," Sarah insisted. "Sound doesn't just materialize out of thin air." "Then where did it come from?" Devon asked, scanning the darkness beyond their firelight. "There's nothing out there. No vehicles, no buildings, no equipment." They spent another hour discussing possibilities: underground caverns, atmospheric phenomena, distant military installations, but none of the explanations felt adequate. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and they retreated to their tents, though sleep came uneasily for all of them. Morning brought renewed courage along with the rising sun. The desert heat returned quickly, driving away the chill of night and any lingering fears. Over breakfast, they planned their route for the day, targeting several locations where unusual phenomena had been reported. "I want to check out the dry lake bed first," Jake said, spreading a map across the hood of the SUV. Multiple accounts mentioned seeing lights there at night, and strange impressions in the surface that appear and disappear. "Lights could be anything," Sarah said, though her skepticism seemed slightly diminished after last night's experience. "Reflections, vehicles in the distance, atmospheric effects." "Sure, but let's actually see the place before we explain it away," Marcus replied, already packing his camera gear. They drove for 40 minutes across increasingly rough terrain, the SUV's suspension groaning with every impact. The dry lake bed appeared suddenly as they crested a small rise, a flat expanse of cracked earth stretching for miles. The surface was pale and smooth, broken into irregular polygons by deep cracks that created a surreal geometric pattern. "Wow," Devon breathed. "It's like another planet." They parked at the edge and walked out onto the lake bed. The cracked surface crunched beneath their feet, and the openness created a sense of exposure that was both exhilarating and uncomfortable. There was nowhere to hide, no shade, just endless flat space under the vast sky. Marcus began photographing the patterns, crouching low to capture the way the cracks created shadows and depth. Sarah walked the perimeter, examining the transition between the lake bed and the surrounding terrain. Jake and Devon ventured toward the center, drawn by something neither could quite articulate. "Jake, look at this," Devon called out, stopping suddenly. A series of impressions marked the surface, each roughly circular and about 6 feet in diameter. They were shallow but distinct, pressed into the hardened earth as if something heavy had rested there. But the strange part was their arrangement. They formed a perfect arc, like points on a compass, all equidistant from a central point. "These don't look natural," Jake said, pulling out a measuring tape from his backpack. He confirmed what his eyes suggested. Each impression was exactly 23 feet from the center, and each was identical in size and depth. Sarah and Marcus joined them, and even Sarah's skepticism couldn't easily explain the geometric precision. "Could be old equipment placements," she suggested. "Maybe someone was doing surveys or research out here 20 years ago, according to the first reports," Marcus countered. "And people say these impressions weren't here, then suddenly appeared, then disappeared again. The reports are inconsistent about when they're visible." "That's because people's memories are unreliable," Sarah said, but her tone carried less conviction than usual. They spent an hour documenting the site, taking measurements, photographs from every angle, and notes about the surrounding area. As they worked, the temperature continued climbing, the sun beating down without mercy. The reflection off the pale surface was nearly blinding, forcing them to wear sunglasses even though it created challenges for photography. "We should head back, grab some water, and plan the next stop," Jake said finally. "I don't want anyone getting heat exhaustion out here." As they walked back toward the SUV, Devon stopped and turned around, shielding his eyes to look back at the impressions they'd been studying. "Guys, does that look different to you?" The others turned. From this distance, the impressions seemed to shimmer in the heat waves rising from the surface. But it was more than that. The pattern seemed to have changed. Where before there had been 7 impressions in an arc, now there appeared to be 9, forming a nearly complete circle. "That's impossible," Sarah said flatly. "We were just there. Nothing changed." They walked back, despite their exhaustion and thirst, needing to confirm what they'd seen. But as they approached, the original 7 impressions remained, exactly as they'd documented. The 2 additional marks they'd seen from a distance simply weren't there. "Heat mirage," Sarah declared. "We're dehydrated and seeing things in the shimmer. It's a known phenomenon." "We all saw the same thing," Marcus pointed out quietly. "The same 2 additional impressions in the same locations." "Shared delusion based on expectation and environmental stress," Sarah countered, but she was gripping her water bottle tightly. Devon pulled out his phone and checked his photos. "I took a picture when we stopped. Let me see if it captured anything." They huddled around his phone screen, enlarging the image. The quality wasn't perfect because of the distance and glare, but the photo clearly showed 7 impressions, just like the reality they were standing in now. Whatever they'd seen from that distance hadn't been captured by the camera. "So we all hallucinated the same thing at the same time," Jake said slowly. "That's the skeptical explanation?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "I don't know what we saw, but I know what we photographed, and I know what's actually here. Can we please get out of the sun now?" They returned to camp, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert's heat was oppressive now, forcing them to rest in the shade of their tents for several hours during the peak afternoon temperatures. Marcus reviewed his footage and photos, making notes about angles, lighting, and possible optical effects. Jake studied maps and reports, trying to find patterns in the various accounts. Sarah read a book, determinedly focusing on something normal. Devon attempted to nap but found himself replaying the morning's events. As the afternoon waned and temperatures became bearable again, they gathered to discuss their next move. "There's a canyon system about 8 miles north," Jake said. "Reports mention echo effects that don't make sense, sounds that repeat but change, or come from the wrong direction. Acoustic anomalies aren't that unusual in certain geological formations," Sarah said, back in her comfort zone. "Sound waves bounce in unexpected ways." "True, but let's check it out anyway," Marcus agreed. The formations themselves might be photographically interesting regardless of any anomalies. They decided to hike rather than drive, wanting to approach the area slowly and observe their surroundings carefully. The terrain was challenging, rocky, and uneven, with hidden dips and rises that made judging distances difficult. The canyon entrance appeared suddenly as they rounded a massive boulder, a narrow cleft in the rock face that seemed to swallow light. The canyon walls rose steeply on both sides, creating a passage barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The temperature dropped noticeably as they entered, the rock providing blessed shade after hours in the direct sun. The walls showed layers of sediment, different colors marking different geological periods, creating a striped effect that was visually striking. "Hello," Devon shouted, unable to resist testing the acoustics. The echo came back wrong. Instead of a simple repetition, the sound seemed to bounce multiple times from different directions, overlapping with itself in ways that created an almost musical quality. And the final echo, the one that should have been the faintest, came back louder than the original shout. "Okay, that's weird," Devon admitted. Marcus pulled out his audio equipment again. "Let's try something controlled. Jake, I want you to walk 50 feet ahead and shout the same word. I'll record and we can analyze the patterns." They ran the experiment multiple times with different words, different volumes, and different positions. The results were consistent in their inconsistency. Sometimes echoes behaved normally. Sometimes they didn't. Twice, the echo came back before Jake even finished speaking, as if the sound were traveling faster than it should. "This doesn't make acoustic sense," Marcus said, reviewing his recordings. "Even accounting for unusual rock formations, sound can't echo before it's fully produced." "Equipment malfunction?" Sarah suggested. "I'm using 3 different recorders, including Devon's phone. They all capture the same anomaly." As they ventured deeper into the canyon, the walls grew taller and the passage narrower. The light took on a strange quality, filtered through the gap above and reflecting off the stone in ways that created shifting shadows. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so disorienting. "Anyone else feel like the walls are moving?" Devon asked, keeping his voice low. They all felt it. The canyon walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slowly. It was subtle enough that focusing directly on any one section showed it was perfectly still, but in peripheral vision, the movement was unmistakable. "Optical illusion caused by the lighting," Sarah said, but she sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as the others. They reached a point where the canyon opened into a small circular area, almost like an amphitheater. The walls here were perfectly smooth, worn by wind and water into an almost polished surface. In the center of the space stood a single rock formation, roughly cylindrical, about 4 feet tall. "That's unusual," Marcus observed, circling the formation with his camera. "The erosion patterns in this space should be uniform, but this structure seems deliberately preserved." Jake approached the cylinder and noticed markings similar to those they'd seen on the formations near their camp, spiraling grooves that followed no natural pattern. He reached out to touch them. "Don't," Sarah said sharply. "We don't know what that is or who put it there." "It's a rock, Sarah. It's not going to bite me." But as his fingers made contact with the stone, they all heard it, a deep resonant tone, like a bell being struck far underground. It lasted several seconds, vibrating through the rock beneath their feet, making their teeth ache. When it faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. "Tell me you all heard that," Jake said, stepping back from the cylinder. They had. Marcus had even recorded it. They stood in the circular space, looking at each other, each trying to find a rational explanation and coming up empty. "We should go," Devon said, his humor completely absent now. "This place feels wrong." No one argued. They retraced their steps through the canyon, moving faster than they'd entered, each of them fighting the urge to run. The walls still seemed to move in their peripheral vision. The echoes of their footsteps came back distorted. And that deep tone seemed to follow them, so faint they might have imagined it, but present nonetheless. When they emerged back into the open desert, the relief was palpable. The sun, though setting now, felt welcoming compared to the oppressive atmosphere of the canyon. "What the hell was that?" Devon asked once they were well away from the entrance. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But we recorded it. We documented it. Whatever we experienced was real." "Real doesn't mean paranormal," Sarah insisted, but her voice shook slightly. There are explanations for everything we've experienced. Unusual geology, atmospheric conditions, equipment interference, psychological suggestion. You're trying really hard to explain away things you can't actually explain, Marcus said gently. It's okay to admit we don't understand something. They hiked back to camp as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold. The temperature was dropping again, but they were all too focused on their thoughts to notice the chill. They'd come looking for mysteries, and they'd found them, but experiencing unexplained phenomena firsthand was far more unsettling than reading about them online. Dinner was a quiet affair. They ate mechanically, each processing the day's events in their own way. Jake kept reviewing his notes, trying to find patterns or connections. Marcus transferred files from his cameras to his laptop, backing up everything they'd documented. Sarah paged through a geology textbook she'd brought, searching for explanations. Devon stared into the fire, uncharacteristically subdued. "So what's the plan for tonight?" Devon finally asked. "Do we just sit here and wait for more weird stuff to happen?" "The dry lake bed," Jake said. "Reports consistently mention lights appearing after dark. If we're going to observe them, tonight's the opportunity." "I'm not sure going back out there in the dark is a good idea," Sarah said. "We came here to investigate," Jake countered. "We can't do that by hiding in camp." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "He's right. We have lights, we have equipment, and we're all together. We'll be fine." "Famous last words," Devon muttered, but he was already pulling on a jacket against the cooling air. They packed lights, cameras, and supplies, making sure everyone had water and fully charged devices. The drive back to the dry lake bed was tense, the headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. Without the moon, which wouldn't rise for several more hours, the stars provided the only other illumination, turning the desert into a landscape of shadows and mysteries. They parked in the same spot as before and walked out onto the lake bed. Their flashlights created pools of brightness that only emphasized the surrounding darkness. Marcus set up his camera on a tripod, prepared to do long exposures to capture any lights that might appear. "Now what?" Devon asked. "Do we just stand here?" "We wait," Jake said. "And we watch." Waiting in the dark desert is its own experience. Every sound is amplified, from the crunch of boots on the cracked earth to the whisper of wind across the flat expanse. The mind plays tricks, turning shadows into movement and imagination into near certainty. They'd been there for almost an hour when Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the far edge of the lake bed. A light, small and pale blue, hovered about 10 feet above the ground. It didn't move at first, just hung there, too bright to be a star, too steady to be a reflection. Then it began to drift slowly across their field of vision, parallel to the horizon. "Tell me you're getting this," Jake breathed to Marcus. Cameras running. The single light was joined by another, then another, until 5 lights moved in a loose formation across the darkness. They didn't behave like aircraft, no navigation lights, no sound, no visible means of propulsion. They simply drifted, sometimes pausing, sometimes accelerating, maintaining their formation but with no apparent coordination. "Those aren't helicopters or drones," Devon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No sound at all. Not even a hum." Sarah was tracking the lights with her binoculars, trying to discern any details. "I can't see any structure. Just pure light, like orbs of luminescence." The lights continued their silent procession for nearly 10 minutes. Then, without warning, they all shot straight up into the sky with impossible acceleration, disappearing in less than a second. The observers were left blinking in the darkness, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. "Did that just happen?" Devon asked. "Please tell me the camera caught that." Marcus was already reviewing the footage. "It's all here. The lights, the movement, the vertical departure. All documented." Jake was pacing now, his excitement overriding any lingering unease. This is exactly what people have reported. Exactly. Lights that don't behave like any known technology, appearing and disappearing with no explanation. There has to be an explanation, Sarah said, but her skepticism was wavering. Ball lightning, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, military testing. Ball lightning doesn't move in formation, Marcus pointed out. And those acceleration patterns would kill any human pilot. The G-forces alone. So what are you saying? Sarah challenged. That they're not human? That they're something else entirely? I'm saying I don't know, Marcus replied calmly. None of us know. That's why we're documenting this. They remained on the dry lake bed for another 2 hours, but the lights didn't return. The temperature continued dropping, eventually driving them back to the warmth of their camp. The drive back was filled with animated discussion, each of them offering theories and observations, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. Back at camp, they huddled around their fire, too energized to sleep despite the late hour. Marcus transferred the video files, making multiple copies to ensure they wouldn't lose the documentation. Jake was already planning their next steps, which areas to explore tomorrow, what other phenomena they might encounter. I think we need to talk about what we're actually doing here, Sarah said suddenly. We came out here looking for mysteries, and we found them. But what if there are things we're not meant to understand? What if poking around in these phenomena is dangerous? Dangerous how? Jake asked. We've been perfectly safe so far. Have we, though? Sarah countered. We've experienced sound anomalies, possible hallucinations, unexplained lights, and physical phenomena we can't explain. What if tomorrow brings something worse? Or what if tomorrow brings something amazing? Jake replied. Sarah, I get that you're scared. I am too, a little. But we have a chance here to document something extraordinary. We can't just run away from it. Devon had been quiet, watching the exchange. I'm with Sarah on being creeped out, but I'm also with Jake on seeing this through. We came this far. Let's at least finish what we started. Marcus nodded. Agreed. But Sarah's not wrong about being cautious. Tomorrow, we stick together, we don't take unnecessary risks, and if something feels genuinely dangerous, we leave. Deal. They all agreed, though Jake's reluctance was obvious. The conversation eventually wound down, and they retreated to their tents. Sleep came easier than expected, exhaustion finally overcoming the adrenaline of the night's events. The next day dawned clear and hot, the desert returning to its daytime personality of harsh sunlight and unforgiving temperatures. Over breakfast, they discussed their plan for what would be their final full day in the desert. Tomorrow they would need to pack up and begin the long drive home. I want to explore further northeast, Jake said, pointing to an area on the map. There's supposed to be a formation out there that casts strange shadows, ones that don't match the position of the sun. Shadow anomalies are usually just misperceived geometry, Sarah said, her skepticism returning with the daylight. Our brains aren't good at judging three-dimensional shapes and their shadows. Then it should be easy to explain once we see it, Marcus said diplomatically. They packed day supplies and set out on foot, choosing to hike rather than risk the SUV on terrain that looked increasingly rough. The landscape here was different from where they'd explored before, more vertical formations, deeper colors in the rock, and an eerie silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it. The formation they sought appeared after an hour's hike, a tall spire of dark rock rising from a base of lighter stone. It stood alone, isolated from other formations, creating a stark silhouette against the bright sky. And its shadow was wrong. The sun was high and slightly to the west, which meant the shadow should have fallen to the east of the formation, extending in a predictable direction. Instead, the shadow fell in multiple directions at once, creating a star pattern on the ground that defied the single light source. Okay, I have no explanation for that, Sarah admitted, staring at the impossible geometry of the shadows. Marcus was already circling the formation, photographing it from every angle. The rock itself is simple, a single spire with some minor irregularities. There's no reason for it to cast multiple shadows from a single light source. Jake crouched at the edge of one shadow arm. And they're not projections or tricks of perspective. These are actual shadows, complete absence of light, cold to the touch. Devon was counting. 7 distinct shadow arms, radiating from the base. Like spokes on a wheel. 7, Marcus repeated. Like the impressions on the dry lake bed. They spent an hour examining the formation, testing theories, and documenting everything. The shadows didn't change as the sun moved across the sky. They remained fixed, 7 arms radiating from the base, regardless of the actual position of the light source. It was as if the rock remembered where shadows should be and refused to acknowledge the current reality. "This is impossible," Sarah said finally. "Shadows don't work this way. Light doesn't work this way." "And yet here we are, observing it," Jake replied. They were preparing to move on to their next location when Devon, who had wandered to the far side of the formation, called out urgently, "Guys, you need to see this." On the side of the spire facing away from the sun, where there should have been only rock in shadow, words were carved into the stone. Not ancient petroglyphs or modern graffiti, but precise letters spelling out a single sentence. "The desert remembers what we choose to forget." The carving was fresh, the edges sharp, the interior of each letter showing clean stone that had been recently exposed. Someone had carved this message, but when and why here, at this isolated and anomalous formation? "That wasn't here yesterday," Marcus said. "We would have seen it on satellite images when I was planning the route." "Unless it was hidden somehow," Sarah suggested, though she sounded unsure. "Or unless it wasn't there yesterday," Devon said quietly. "Maybe things appear in this desert. Maybe that's part of the phenomenon." Jake was photographing the inscription from every angle. "The desert remembers what we choose to forget." "What does that mean?" "It means someone knows people come here," Sarah said. "Someone knows about the phenomena and wants to send a message." "Or it's part of the phenomena itself," Marcus countered. "A message from whatever creates these anomalies." "Rocks don't write messages," Sarah insisted. "Rocks don't cast impossible shadows either," Jake reminded her. Yet here we are. They debated whether to continue exploring or return to camp. The inscription had unsettled all of them. Even Jake's enthusiasm was tempered by the implication that they might not be alone in this remote area, whether that meant other people or something else entirely. In the end, curiosity won out. They pressed on to their final planned location, a small box canyon where reports mentioned temperature anomalies, spots that were inexplicably cold or hot regardless of sun exposure or time of day. The box canyon was smaller than the one they'd explored yesterday, with walls that curved inward at the top, creating an almost enclosed space. Even in the bright afternoon, the interior felt shadowed and close. They spread out, searching for the reported temperature anomalies. Sarah found the first one, a circular area about 6 feet in diameter where the air was noticeably colder. She could see her breath misting in the chill, despite the surrounding air being well over 90 degrees. Stepping in and out of the circle demonstrated a sharp temperature boundary, warm to cold in a single step. 45 degrees, Sarah said, checking the thermometer. Inside the circle it's 45 degrees. 3 feet outside, it's 92. That's impossible without a mechanism. Marcus found a second anomaly, this one hot instead of cold. The air shimmered with heat, and his thermometer maxed out at 120 degrees. Both circles were precise, with clear boundaries that didn't shift or waver. Underground thermal vents? Devon suggested. That would explain hot spots, but not cold ones, Marcus replied. And the boundaries are too sharp. Temperature gradients in nature are gradual, not abrupt. Jake was examining the walls of the canyon when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Scratches in the rock, not natural erosion, but deliberate marks, as if something with claws had scraped against the stone repeatedly. The scratches were fresh, cutting through the darker oxidized surface to reveal lighter stone beneath. "Something's been here recently," Jake called out, bringing the others to examine the marks. The scratches were high up, at least 8 feet off the canyon floor, and they covered a large area of the wall. Whatever made them had reach and strength, gouging deep into solid rock. "Animal, maybe," Sarah said, though she sounded doubtful. "A mountain lion marking territory?" "Mountain lions don't reach 8 feet high, and their claws don't score solid rock like this," Marcus countered, running his fingers along one of the deep grooves. Devon was backing toward the canyon entrance. "I think we should leave." "No." No one argued. The combination of impossible temperature zones and fresh claw marks created an atmosphere of immediate danger that even Jake's curiosity couldn't overcome. They retreated from the box canyon quickly, not quite running but moving with purpose. Once outside, back in the normal desert environment, they paused to catch their breath and process what they'd found. "We need to talk about what's really happening here," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "These aren't just unexplained phenomena anymore. Something physical made those marks. Something real." "We don't know what made them," Jake countered, but his own certainty was wavering. "We know enough to understand we might be in danger," Marcus said firmly. "I think we've documented what we came to find. Maybe it's time to head back." They hiked back to camp in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert, which had seemed merely mysterious before, now felt actively hostile. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more ominous, and every rock formation a potential hiding place for whatever had made those marks. Back at camp, they made the decision to pack up and leave first thing in the morning rather than spend another night. The sun was already setting, and none of them wanted to attempt the drive in the dark, but they could be ready to leave at first light. As they prepared dinner, Jake pulled out his laptop and began reviewing all the footage and photos they'd collected over the past few days. He arranged them chronologically, creating a timeline of their encounters and observations. "Look at this," he said, calling the others over. "The 7 impressions on the lake bed, the 7 shadow arms on the spire, and look here, in Marcus's photos of the first rock formation we examined, 7 distinct spiral patterns. It's the same number recurring." "Patterns are how humans make sense of random data," Sarah said. "We find connections even when they don't exist." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "Or maybe there's something to it. 7 is significant in a lot of cultures, mathematics, natural phenomena. It could be a clue." "A clue to what?" Devon asked. "What are we even trying to solve here?" Marcus had pulled up a different set of images. "Look at these temperature readings I've been logging automatically every hour. There's a pattern here too. Regular fluctuations that don't correspond to normal day-night cycles. They spike every 7 hours, regardless of whether it's day or night." "That's actually interesting," Sarah admitted, studying the graphs. "That suggests something regular and predictable, which means something measurable, potentially explainable." They spent the evening analyzing their data, looking for more patterns, more connections. The recurring 7s could have been coincidence, or they could have been meaningful. The truth was elusive, hiding in the numbers and images and recordings they'd collected. As full darkness fell, they built up their fire and sat around it, knowing this would be their last night in the desert. The stars emerged in their full glory once again, the Milky Way stretching across the sky, indifferent to the small mysteries unfolding on the ground below. "Do you think we found what we were looking for?" Devon asked quietly. Jake considered the question. "We found mysteries. We documented anomalies that we can't fully explain." "Is that what we were looking for?" "I think so, yes." "But we didn't find answers," Sarah pointed out. "We have more questions now than when we arrived." "Maybe that's the point," Marcus suggested. "Maybe the desert, this place, isn't about answers. Maybe it's about reminding us how much we don't know." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the desert night. Then, breaking the quiet, they heard it again, that low humming sound from their first night. But this time it was closer, more distinct, and it seemed to pulse in a rhythm that matched the pattern Marcus had identified in the temperature data. 7 pulses, then silence. 7 pulses again. Over and over. "It's communicating," Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. "Or trying to." "That's a pattern, a deliberate signal." "Or it's a natural phenomenon with regular periodicity," Sarah countered, but she was recording it on her phone, capturing evidence of something she couldn't explain away. The humming continued for nearly 20 minutes, maintaining its 7-pulse pattern with mechanical precision. Then it faded, leaving them in the profound silence of the desert night. "The desert remembers what we choose to forget," Marcus quoted. Maybe that's what all this is about. Things that exist outside our normal understanding, phenomena that we've rationalized away or dismissed because they don't fit our worldview. Or maybe it's just weird geology and atmospheric conditions that create unusual sensory experiences, Sarah said, but her heart wasn't in the skepticism anymore. Devon stirred the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. "Whatever it is, I'm glad we came. I'm glad we saw what we saw, even if I never fully understand it." They stayed up late, reluctant to end their final night despite their exhaustion. The desert had revealed some of its secrets while holding others close, leaving them with experiences they would spend years trying to fully process and understand. As they finally retreated to their tents, Jake took one last look at the star-filled sky. Morning arrived with the swift certainty of desert sunrise, temperature climbing from freezing to comfortable in less than an hour. They broke camp efficiently, packing with the practice of people who'd done this many times before. But their movements were slower than necessary, each of them reluctant to leave despite their agreement to go. "Last sweep," Marcus said, walking the perimeter of their campsite with his camera. "Just documenting the area one more time." As he filmed, something caught his eye, a glint of reflection from the rock formation they'd examined that first evening. He walked over, the others following, curious about what had grabbed his attention. Embedded in the rock, at exactly eye level, was a small metallic object. It was geometric, precisely machined, definitely not natural and definitely not something that had been there when they'd examined this formation 3 days ago. "No one touch it," Sarah warned immediately. "We don't know what it is or where it came from." But Jake was already reaching for it, carefully extracting it from its position. It came free easily, as if it had been placed there rather than embedded for years. The object was about the size of a quarter, made of a metal that didn't tarnish despite the desert conditions, covered in the same spiral patterns they'd seen carved into rocks throughout the area. "It's a message," Jake said, turning it over in his hands. "Or a marker. Something left deliberately for us, or for whoever comes here." "By who?" Devon asked, though he already suspected there was no answer to that question. "Does it matter?" Marcus replied, photographing the object from every angle before Jake tucked it carefully into his pocket. "Someone, or something, knows people come here. Knows we're looking for explanations. This is their response." They loaded the last of their gear and climbed into the SUV, taking one final look at the landscape that had challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. The rock formation stood silent and enigmatic, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere out there, phenomena they couldn't explain continued to occur, witnessed or not. The drive back to civilization was long and hot, but none of them minded. They had hours to discuss what they'd experienced, to compare notes and theories, to try to make sense of the impossible things they'd documented. "We should analyze everything properly once we're home," Marcus said. "Get the audio files to experts, have the video footage examined for any artifacts or manipulations, test that metal object Jake pocketed." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "Even if experts can't explain what we recorded, that doesn't prove anything paranormal. It just means we encountered phenomena that current science can't explain." "Isn't that enough?" Jake countered. Isn't proof that there are things beyond our current understanding exactly what we were looking for? I guess it depends on what you consider proof, Sarah replied, and what you're willing to accept as unexplainable versus what you think we just haven't figured out yet. Devon had been quiet in the back seat, staring out at the passing desert. I think what bothers me most is the feeling that we were being watched. The whole time we were there, especially after we found that inscription, I felt like something was observing us, studying us the way we were trying to study it. That's a natural response to being in an isolated environment where you've encountered unexplained phenomena, Sarah said. Your brain creates a sense of presence to explain the unease you feel. Maybe, Devon agreed. Or maybe we really were being watched, and my brain was correctly interpreting real signals rather than creating imaginary ones. They stopped for gas and supplies at a small town on the edge of the desert, the first human habitation they'd encountered in days. The normalcy of it was jarring, gas pumps and convenience stores and people going about ordinary lives, all while phenomena that defied explanation occurred just a few hours away in the wilderness. As they stood outside the convenience store, cold drinks in hand, Jake pulled out the metal object and examined it in the bright sunlight. The spiral patterns caught the light, refracting it in ways that seemed to shift and change as he turned it. 7 spirals, Marcus observed, counting the patterns. Again with 7. We should have that analyzed, Sarah said. Find out what metal it's made of, how it was manufactured, maybe even date it somehow. And when they tell us it's impossible, Jake asked. Made of alloys that shouldn't exist, manufactured with techniques we don't have, or dated to times before humans were even in this region, what then? Then we have real evidence of something genuinely anomalous, Sarah replied. But we have to do the analysis first. We can't just assume it's impossible without testing. They agreed to pursue every possible avenue of investigation once they returned home. The footage, the audio recordings, the temperature data, the photographs, and the metal object, all of it would be examined by whatever experts they could find who were willing to look at it seriously. The rest of the drive passed in a mixture of excited planning and contemplative silence. They were leaving the desert behind physically, but its mysteries had taken root in their minds, questions that would persist long after they'd returned to their normal lives. As the desert gave way to scrubland and eventually to the outskirts of the city, Devon spoke up one last time. Are we going to tell people about what we experienced? We have to, Jake said immediately. We documented it for a reason. This is exactly the kind of thing people need to know about. But how do we tell it? Marcus asked. How do we present our experiences without sounding like conspiracy theorists or attention seekers? We present the evidence, Sarah said firmly. The recordings, the data, the photographs. We present what we documented and let people draw their own conclusions. And the metal object? Devon asked. Jake pulled it from his pocket one more time, watching the light play across its surfaces. This we keep private until we know more about what it is. If it turns out to be genuinely anomalous, then we reveal it. But if we show it too soon, before we have proper analysis, we risk it being dismissed or confiscated. They all agreed. The object was their ace in the hole, potential proof of something beyond current understanding, and it needed to be protected until they could verify its nature. As they reached the city limits, the desert now just a shimmer on the horizon behind them, each of them felt the weight of what they'd experienced settling into place. They'd gone looking for mysteries and found them. They'd documented phenomena that defied easy explanation. And they'd returned with more questions than answers. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the desert's gift wasn't answers, but the reminder that mystery still existed in the world, that there were phenomena beyond human understanding, and that the search for knowledge was ongoing, never complete. Jake pulled into Devon's driveway first, helping him unload his gear. As Devon grabbed his backpack, he paused. "Same time next year?" he asked with a slight smile. Jake grinned. "Absolutely. There's so much more out there to explore." Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. Let's see what we learn from this trip first before we plan the next one. Marcus was already reviewing his equipment, planning upgrades and improvements for future expeditions. We'll need better audio recording equipment, and maybe thermal imaging cameras. If we're going back, we should go prepared. As they drove away, leaving Devon waving from his doorway, the remaining three friends felt the bond of shared experience, the knowledge that they'd witnessed something together that few others had seen. Whether they ever fully understood it or not, the desert had changed them, opened their minds to possibilities they'd previously dismissed. They dropped Sarah off next, then Marcus, each departure accompanied by promises to meet soon, to begin analyzing their data, to start planning their findings presentation. By the time Jake reached his own home, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of desert sunrises. He carried his gear inside, the metal object still in his pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the mysteries they'd encountered. As he unpacked, he found himself already planning what experts to contact, how to present their evidence, when they could return to the desert to explore further. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The humming sound with its 7-pulse pattern. The impossible shadows that defied the sun's position. The lights on the dry lake bed that accelerated beyond any known aircraft capability. The inscription that seemed to appear from nowhere. The temperature anomalies with their sharp, unnatural boundaries. And those claw marks, high on the canyon wall, suggesting something physical, something real had been there. He opened his laptop and began organizing the files Marcus had shared with everyone. Hours of video footage, hundreds of photographs, audio recordings of phenomena that shouldn't exist. The data was overwhelming, but patterns kept emerging. That recurring number 7. The geometric precision of the impressions. The spiral motifs that appeared on rocks, on the metal object, in the very structure of the anomalies themselves. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Can't sleep either. Been reviewing the audio files. That humming sound, when I run it through spectral analysis, there are frequencies present that are below and above normal human hearing range. We shouldn't have been able to hear all of it, yet we all did. Jake replied immediately. What does that mean? Marcus responded. I don't know. But it suggests the phenomenon was interacting directly with our perception, not just creating sound waves in the normal way. Our brains were interpreting something that physics says we shouldn't have fully perceived. Over the next few weeks, the four friends met regularly, turning Jake's garage into an impromptu research center. They covered the walls with printouts of their photographs, created timelines of events, and consulted with experts who were willing to look at their evidence without immediate dismissal. A physicist from the local university examined the temperature data and admitted the boundaries were sharper than any natural phenomenon he'd encountered. An acoustics expert listened to the canyon recordings and couldn't explain how echoes could precede the sounds that created them. A metallurgist agreed to analyze the object they'd found, and his preliminary tests showed an alloy composition that didn't match any known industrial process. But for every expert who found their evidence intriguing, there were others who dismissed it outright, offering explanations that felt inadequate but comfortingly rational. Equipment malfunctions, environmental factors, perceptual biases. The skeptics had answers for everything, even when those answers required ignoring significant portions of the data. Sarah struggled the most with the aftermath. Her worldview had been built on rationality, on the belief that everything had an explanation grounded in known science. The desert had shaken that foundation, and she found herself caught between what she'd experienced and what she'd been trained to believe was possible. I keep trying to find the flaw, she admitted one evening as they reviewed footage together. The mistake we made, the variable we didn't account for. But the more I look, the more solid our documentation becomes. Maybe that's okay, Marcus said gently. Maybe not everything needs to be explained immediately. Science advances by encountering things it can't explain and then working toward understanding. We might have documented something genuinely new. Or genuinely old, Jake added. That inscription, The desert remembers what we choose to forget. What if these phenomena have been occurring for centuries, millennia even, and we've just rationalized them away? Dismissed them as superstition or misperception because they didn't fit our models of reality? Devon, who had been quiet, finally spoke. I think what scares me most is the intelligence behind it. Those patterns weren't random. The seven-pulse rhythm, the geometric precision, even the way the phenomena seemed to escalate as we explored deeper. It felt responsive, like something was aware of us and choosing what to reveal. They sat in silence, contemplating the implications. If the phenomena were intelligent, if there was intention behind the anomalies, then their expedition had been more than just observation. It had been a form of contact, a meeting between human curiosity and something that existed beyond their current framework of understanding. As months passed, they continued their analysis, but they also began planning their return. The desert had more to show them, they were certain of that. The phenomena they'd encountered felt like an introduction, a test perhaps, to see if they were worthy of deeper mysteries. Jake kept the metal object on his desk, a constant reminder of what they'd found and what still waited to be discovered. Sometimes, late at night, he swore he could feel it vibrating slightly, pulsing with that same 7-beat rhythm they'd heard in the desert. When he mentioned this to the others, they admitted they'd felt it too, even though scientific instruments detected nothing unusual. The desert had marked them in ways both tangible and intangible. They carried its mysteries with them, embedded not just in their recordings and photographs, but in their consciousness. They saw patterns now where others saw randomness. They questioned assumptions that most people accepted without thought. They had become seekers, drawn to the unknown, unable to settle for easy answers. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, the phenomena continued. Lights danced above the dry lake bed. Shadows defied the sun. Temperatures fluctuated in impossible patterns. The rocks stood silent, holding secrets carved into their surfaces. And the desert remembered, patient and eternal, waiting for those brave enough or curious enough to venture into its mysteries once again. The four friends would return. They had to. The desert had shown them wonders and left them with questions that demanded answers. Next time they would be better prepared, better equipped, and more determined to understand what existed in that remote wilderness. But they also knew that the desert would have its own plans, its own lessons to teach. The phenomena didn't exist for human understanding. They simply existed, challenging perception, defying explanation, reminding anyone who encountered them that reality was far stranger and more complex than everyday experience suggested. And that was the gift, not answers, but the restoration of wonder, the recognition that mystery still thrived in the world, that there were frontiers yet to explore, and that the universe held secrets that patience and curiosity might eventually illuminate. The desert remembered what humanity chose to forget, that we are small, that our knowledge is limited, and that the greatest adventure lies not in explaining everything, but in remaining open to the inexplicable. And if you found this journey into the unknown as fascinating as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more incredible explorations coming your way, more mysteries to uncover, and more stories that challenge everything you think you know about reality. Thanks for joining us on this adventure into the Nevada desert. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the truth behind the mysteries. See you in the next one.